This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalahungva. In 2 days, a Montana court will hear a case involving voting rights for 5 tribes. The Montana Ballot Interference Prevention Act would place severe restrictions on ballot collection efforts, say lawmakers for the tribes. The Native American Rights Fund and the American Civil Liberties Union are fighting on behalf of the tribes. They say the majority of Native American communities in rural Montana vote by mail. And the tribal communities work with organizations that collect and transport ballots to election offices. Otherwise, voting would be inaccessible. The lawsuit was filed on behalf of the Assiniboine and Sioux tribes of Fort Peck, the Blackfeet Nation, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes of the Flathead Reservation, the Crow tribe, and the Fort Belknap Indian community, as well as 2 indigenous-led organizations aimed at increasing voter turnout in the state. The ruling will come days before the June 2nd primary. The coronavirus pandemic is shining a big spotlight on the many disparities in Indian country, and now 2 lawmakers want to see just how bad things are for tribes. Senator Elizabeth Warren and Congresswoman Deb Haaland are asking the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights to re-examine its report on Indian country. The report, called Broken Promises: Continuing Federal Funding Shortfall for Native Americans, was published in 2018. The report concluded that federal programs for tribes are chronically underfunded and not structured efficiently, and that was before the pandemic. Underfunding for education, housing, and healthcare is becoming more evident in this pandemic. According to the report, federal healthcare spending per capita was more than $9,000, but in the Indian Health Service System, the amount was only $3,300. Warren and Haaland want to know how the pandemic has been exacerbated due to the underfunding and other issues named in the report. And they want to know if the additional funds allocated by Congress and the executive branch are doing enough to help Native people. The 2 wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post, which appeared this week. And on the heels of that opinion piece by Warren and Haaland, the Department of Health and Human Services says it will provide $500 million more in relief funding for the Indian health programs. Payments will be made from the Provider Relief Fund in response to the pandemic's disproportionate impact on Native people. Funding will go towards personal protection equipment, also known as PPE, and to cover increased labor costs. The funding provides vital support for 200 health facilities, some of which may be the only facility within a day's travel. Combined with previous funding, this distribution brings the total amount in new resources to $2.4 billion. For the latest numbers of COVID positive tests in Indian country, let's go to Jordan Bennett-Begay, our Washington editor. Jordan?
Yate Patty, Yate Shikisto Shidinee. 7 tribes announced more COVID-19 cases and deaths in their communities. And here are the latest numbers from our database. There are 6,725 positive confirmed cases and 219 deaths in the Indian health system. Again, that is a total of 6,725 positive confirmed cases and 219 deaths as of this morning. The Norton Sound Health Corporation in Nome, Alaska reported its 3rd case. And this case is the 2nd employee of the tribal health organization to test positive through routine employee testing. The organization says it's encouraging COVID-19 testing for everyone in the region because tracking the virus is challenging for them. And in New Mexico, the Mescalero Apache tribe announced its first COVID-19 related death. The individual was an elderly woman on the reservation, and the tribe reported 3 new positive confirmed cases, giving the tribe a total of 7 cases. And President Gabe Aguilar said, quote, "The tribe has worked hard over the last 2 months to avoid this. I am heartbroken," end quote. And the tribe is now in a 14-day lockdown. The tribal offices and businesses on the reservation are closed. Tribal residents who work off the reservation need a letter from their employer. And the White Mountain Apache in Arizona has 18 more cases, giving them a total of 632 cases and 6 deaths. In Arizona, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community reported 28 new cases, and the tribe has 34 cases in total. And in Mississippi, the Mississippi Band Choctaw Indians now has a total of 449 cases, Patty.
That's quite an increase. Jordan Benebigay, thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll be right back.
This is Indian Country Today.
Welcome back. If there's one thing that unites everyone in this pandemic, it's food. Grocery shopping is becoming a contact sport as people try to shop and maintain social distance in most cases. We've seen news reports about the spread of the virus in meatpacking plants, causing them to close. We've watched video of farmers dumping their crops because they don't have the workforce or the means to get the food to market. So what does this food situation look like in Indian country? So many tribal reservations are in remote areas with little to no access to fresh food. Where does that leave the people? Joining us today is Elizabeth Hoover, and she's an associate professor of American Studies and Ethnic Studies at Brown University. She's also a member of the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
Well, let's start with some numbers here, and they come from the National Congress of American Indians report from just not a few months ago here. 1/4 of American Indians and Alaska Native households receive SNAP benefits, and that's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. 276 tribes administer the food distribution program on their reservations, and 68% of American Indians and Alaska Natives children qualify for free school lunches. Plus, Native mothers make up more than 12% of all mothers who get WIC benefits, and that's the Women, Infants, and Children Nutrition Program. Professor, in this pandemic, where are Native families getting food?
Anywhere they can, essentially. So more and more people are relying on the FDIPR, the Food Distribution Program, on Indian reservations. We're hearing about increases in the number of families who are applying, but also an increase in the amount of food that families are taking away. So there's a certain amount allotted, and more people are taking that full amount than had been in the past. People are looking to food banks, which are increasingly running out of supplies. They're looking to different mutual aid projects. There's a lot of grassroots projects that have popped up. So for example, in Minneapolis, you have the folks at the American Indian Center, Brian Yazzie, and some of the chefs out of the Gatherings Cafe, Ben and Linus and Vanessa, have been cooking for the elders there because there are a number of food feeding programs for different parts of the Native community that have been shut down. So they've been cooking more food there to try to step in. The Cheyenne River Youth Project in South Dakota has been creating meals for the youth that they work with. So you have all of these community projects that are trying to step in and do that work of feeding folks that ordinarily would have gotten meals at different programs or schools or centers that have all been closed down now. So people are trying to get creative, and more people have become interested in putting in gardens. And so thinking about how can they provide that food for their own families right out of the land adjacent to their houses.
And this whole movement of indigenous foods, it's not new. It's been building for a number of years. Is this pandemic speeding up that process?
Yes, I think there's always been people interested in planting their own food, foraging, hunting, gathering, fishing, all of those things that folks here on Turtle Island have been doing since the beginning of time to get food. So people have been interested in remaining connected to those foods. And other folks have been busy or just less interested. And so I think having food suddenly become less available has piqued the interest of some folks who might not have been as interested in these different grassroots projects. So I'm hearing, especially from seed keepers and people running different projects that are part of the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network, that all of a sudden everybody's like, oh yeah, remember how you were always talking about seeds? Where can I get those seeds? I'm interested now in putting a garden in, that before it just seemed like maybe too much work. But when people are like, well, too much work, or you go to the grocery store and the shelves might not be stocked, it's suddenly seeming more and more worth the effort to put in a garden.
And we're also hearing from tribes who are opening up their hunting or fishing grounds to their tribal members so they can go out and maybe it's not in season, but they have that sovereign right to allow their tribal members to hunt or fish. And they're doing that to provide food for their people.
Hmm. So people are getting creative and going back to becoming more interested, I think, in the foods that their ancestors ate that might have taken a little more work to put on the table, but are more available and the community has a greater level of control over.
And how do you think this pandemic will change the federal food programs, like the Farm Bill that passed? How, with looking at providing people food that's relative to their area, that ties into who they are from different parts of the country, and not a food box that's, one size fits all?
So people who have been part of the food box working group have been pushing to make it so that they can have more local control over what goes into that box. So exercising that 638 authority, letting tribal programs decide where to spend some of the money to put the food into those food boxes. And this is important because this will allow those food distribution programs to support local farms and tribal run farms and on other kinds of food producers. So wild rice producers, fisher people. And so to be able to provide locally important foods to people in that community rather than having all of the boxes be identical. And so procuring wild rice and then sending it all over the country rather than keeping it to the region where people really value that rice. And so it's important to be able to tailor those food boxes to what those families there really want and need.
And that's kind of indigenizing that food box.
Yeah, and supporting those local farmers. So, I wrote a blog post on the Garden Warriors Good Seeds site that I maintain. And as part of that, I talked to Joe Van Elstein, who is, he helps to run the food distribution program for the Little Traverse Bay Band up in Michigan, as well as helping to run their tribal farm there. And his argument, is that, okay, here you have a tribal farm that has suddenly lost a great deal of its market. That the food's not going to the casino because the casino isn't open. The markets that they had been delivering to, the restaurants they had been, selling food to, everything is closed down. And so here now you have a farm really in need of customers, and you have a food distribution program that's getting food, shipped in from all over creation. It would be much better to support that farm with this feeding program. And I think that's a model that would be helpful to programs all over the country.
Absolutely. And, our diet, our traditional diets, at least, were based and tied to the land where our people were located, where we lived. And so if you're near the ocean, then you have a diet that has a lot of seafood. But if you're in a desert area, and I think about this because I'm in the Sonoran Desert, it's food that grows naturally. You don't even have to plant it. And so the O'odham people, the Hu'ugam people would go out to the desert and harvest all the cactus and all the tepary beans and things like that. So it's interesting to see how where you're located, what is your food source?
Mm-hmm. And choya buds and tepary beans are amazing and delicious and healthy for everybody, but they should be given first priority to the people who have interacted with those foods for a very long time. And even something like corn, the corn that O'odham people or Hopi people are growing, the plant is really different than what people here in the Northeast are growing. The root systems are so different. I mean, it's fascinating. The growing time is different. And so, we were talking about corn mush before this started, and everybody's got their version of corn mush, but they all taste a little bit different and are a little bit familiar to people depending on where they're from.
Right. And for Hopi corn and Hopi cornfields, we don't plant right next to each plant. There is like about a foot of different a space between each corn plant, so that one plant can soak up any moisture that comes. And I've heard Hopi farming referred to as faith-based farming because there is no irrigation, and it's this is corn that's planted in a high desert. So it's those prayers and living a good life that will bring that moisture. So it's an interesting look at how farming is done, among my people, the Hopi people, and say tribes in the Northeast, where they've got a lot of water, and the corn plants are right next to each other.
We mound it up to keep the roots from drowning when it rains so much in the spring. Yeah, that's why some of these different heirloom seed projects are so important, because you can't take Hopi corn seeds and expect them to do well everywhere, or take Mohawk corn seeds and expect them to thrive in the Sonoran Desert there. And so that's why these different seed projects have been really important for maintaining and giving people access to the seeds that will do well where they are.
It's interesting. You look at the different regions and what foods are there. Talk about the resiliency gardens. What is that movement?
So the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network, directed by Rowan White, who is an Akwesasne Mohawk seed keeper who runs a seed farm in California. She's been working with communities all over the country for some time now, helping to train more seed keepers and people who can conduct these workshops to help educate their fellow community members. And when people first became, at the beginning of this pandemic, suddenly very interested in gardens because they couldn't get access to what they had hoped to at grocery stores or through other food programs, she put out a call to Native families saying, if you need seeds, reach out to us, and started putting together these seed packets. And she calls them resilience gardens rather than victory gardens, because victory gardens have this sort of wartime connotation at a time in the past. A time when land was being snatched away from Japanese families who were being marched off to camps, and white American families putting gardens on them. So victory gardens kind of harken back to another sort of grim time. And so she felt it important to call them resilience gardens, because these are Native families continuing to be resilient in the face of another challenge, and utilizing these important heirloom seeds. And so that's why resilience gardens has a nicer name. People talk about battling COVID and going to war against COVID, and it seems like the better stance is sort of hunkering down at home and utilizing what you have and being resilient to a challenging time, and knowing that we will come out the other end of this.
Well, maybe this is a personal preference for me, but these government foods that are provided for our people often have dried milk. So you mix that up with water and then you have your milk. But yet most Native Americans are lactose intolerant. So perhaps in this whole rethinking of food products, milk will go out the door.
Good luck battling the dairy lobby on that one.
Well, it comes back to, what is our health today? And again, based on the government food assistance that has been provided, but it's high, the foods are high in fat, high in cholesterol and carbohydrates. That's what I'm trying to say. So what kind of change do you hope to see with that coming out of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, the food package working group folks, Joe has described to me over and over how they've been fighting to get healthier foods into those boxes, how they've been working. The program started as a way of offloading commodities that the government bought as a way of stabilizing prices and supporting farmers, making them shelf stable and then offloading them to hungry folks in America, and has since, because of the efforts of folks who have really been fighting to make them more nourishing and less just a commodity dump on people, the food box working group has been pushing to get more fresh fruits and vegetables in there, to get lower salt content, lower sugar content in some of those cans. And so I think they're pushing in the right direction, because families are going to continue to need this kind of assistance. It would be great if there was a time in the future when every tribe could feed all of its community members, and people wouldn't have to rely on that. That's a little ways off. So in the meantime, it's important to have this as a backup for families that are food insecure. But the more that the money that goes into that program can be used to purchase local foods, local produce, local meats, then that's the way to go to make this a program that's also healthy and nourishing for people.
And that's appropriate to the people wherever they live in their part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of years ago, you took a tour to a lot of different Indian reservations to look at their farming techniques. Have you touched base with them in this pandemic to see where their programs are, or how they might see coming out of this pandemic? Places like the Bishop Paiute and their aquaponics, or the Coshada tribe's greenhouse farming?
I have not heard from Coshada and Bishop, but a number of these other projects, I've kind of, kept tabs with people, kept in with people. Facebook is really incredible in that way. So projects like Dream of Wild Health in Minneapolis that has been using the farm to try to produce more and more food for families. Other programs like that. So it's been challenging because a lot of so I specifically went to visit community-based gardening and farming projects, and most of which the goal was to get as many community members involved and to get as many youth out there. And so right now it's been a little challenging because trying to run community-based programs when people aren't supposed to be close to each other, these programs are really kind of running on bare bones staff where they're able. And so that's been the biggest challenge is, how to get people involved in a safe way, how to get the planting going, how to get the seeds in the ground when people can't be close to each other. So people are, working hard to try to, with as few people as process, get those seeds in the ground because the growing season's not going to wait for this pandemic to pass.
Oh, that's very true. So, so what else is the Native Food Alliance, Sovereignty Alliance doing in this pandemic?
So right now, there's been an effort to think about how to push programming online. So, we're getting a little tired of looking at screens, but it's been an important way to still connect with people because often there has been these different there's been food summits and these opportunities for people to come together for mentorship, for sharing information, and that's not safe right now. So there's the virtual Intertribal Food Summit that's going to be happening on June 20th. So for people who've been missing those food summits and the opportunity to learn more about Native foods, that will be an online version of that. So people are going to be recording different activities and lessons, and there'll be some, in real-time presentations happening. So I would encourage people, the website is intertribalfoodsummit.com. You can go learn more about that there. The Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance has been sponsoring the kind of Indigenous Chopped series. I think we're on week 4. So each week a Native chef puts out a challenge, and other Native chefs have been posting on Facebook and Instagram their dishes and videos of them making the dishes in response to that week's challenge. So I just had the opportunity to virtually visit with some chefs to judge the savory dessert challenge from last week. And there was some amazing entries. There were like 14 entries, and people got really creative in bringing together savory and sweet Indigenous foods to try to make some really beautiful desserts. Unfortunately,
and all dairy-free, right?
Dairy-free, refined sugar-free, gluten-free. So there's a lot of beautiful natural sweeteners out there that people were using. We really wanted to taste them. It was the sad thing about being a judge on a virtual food challenge, but we closely scrutinized pictures and videos and kind of commiserated over Zoom and came to the choice that way. So I would encourage people to go check out those things. If they go to the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance Facebook site, they can see where people have posted all of these different challenges. And keep an eye out, there's a number of grant opportunities out there that communities should look into that are working to try to support food projects in the time of COVID. So the Indian Collective had put out some grant opportunities. The NCAI Tribal Food Sovereignty Advancement Initiative is putting together a food sovereignty resource directory that will be going out soon that will inform people on some opportunities. Slow Food USA had some resilience grants that a number of Indigenous projects were just selected for to get some funding, and I think there's another round coming. So I hope people will take advantage of that and put that to work for some interesting food projects in their community and check out some of these virtual events to get new ideas for creative food projects.
Wow, and it's just amazing to see the abundance of food that we have in our communities. And again, this idea of coming back to those traditional foods, it's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to continue following your progress. One last thought before we go on this whole pandemic and food and the scarcity of food for Indian people. One last thought, Professor.
Oh, it's going to be a question. One last thought. be creative, go see what's in your yard. A lot of the things we identify as weeds are actually edible if you just blanch them or steam them. So don't go dump a bunch of herbicides in your yard. Figure out what's out there to be eaten. Get involved in a garden. If you don't have your own garden, there may be community gardens you can safely participate in. And go check out some of the ideas up on NAFSA for creative ways to combine what's already in your cupboard into something new and fun.
Yes, isn't that interesting? What some people may think are weeds are actually very good and edible plants, and probably tea.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Professor Elizabeth Hoover, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Thalohungba. Join us again tomorrow.
This is Indian Country Today.